And talk a little bit about soil health, soil quality. And I'd like to start out with just a question. Is that quality soil? So let me change your perspective and change the parameters. I'm 7 years old. I have a Tonka truck. It's sunshiny, 70 degrees, and I'm bored stiff. Is this quality soil? Yep, it's the best you can get. So when we talk soil quality, or you hear the term soil quality, you always need to understand, what are they talking about? Are they going to be building a road? Are they going to be growing plants? Are they going to be playing in a sandbox? I say that and I start the conversation out that way because we've heard soil health. It's just a catchphrase. It's the next thing. It'll pass. It's just a fad term. When we talk about soil health, though, we talk about soil health, we're talking about living organisms.
Mike, they like your talk.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as they don't start chewing on my shoe. But we're talking about living organisms in the soil. It's really tipping the hat to, it is a living system that we're working on. It's not a dead system. It's not just something that is a building material. It's not just something to hold up a plant or let the plant roots grow in. So with that, this is one of your most valuable tools in assessing the health of your soil. Doesn't matter if you're in a 1,000-acre farm or a 1,000-square-foot garden. Your shovel is your best tool to go out, dig a hole, look at the soil, tear it apart, smell it, get a feel for what it looks like. When you push it in the ground, does it go in easily? Does it go in easily a little bit and then all of a sudden hit a hard pan? Thinking about that, looking at that, gives you an understanding of what we can't see, what's underneath the ground. So always have a shovel with you. So when we're looking at the soil health, we're looking at the biology. So there's a lot of talk in soil health for gardens, small scale or large scale farming. It really doesn't matter. The biology is the biology. Feeding the biology, taking care of the biology matters whether you're on a large scale or small scale. And thinking about in the natural system, carbon is the currency. We think of dollars, we think of money. In the natural system, carbon is the currency. The fungi in the soil, a lot of the biology in the soil can't make their own energy. They rely on plants to give them that energy. If we don't have green photosynthetic activity on the surface, the engine that is creating that sugar, putting it into the soil, we don't have that soil system living. So in the soil, big concept to understand is we're either creating and retaining organic matter or we're burning it. That's the two options. There is no in between other than when it's absolutely frozen, it goes to a very, very slow rate of decomposition, but we're still burning that organic matter if we don't have that green photosynthetic matter. The biology is decomposing the organic residues. They're decomposing the glues, the structure of the soil so that they can survive. So when we're talking about the principles of soil health, one of the big principles is keeping a living root in that soil as long as we can. Reason for that, and reason we say living root, is to push those exudates, push those sugars down into that soil to feed the biology. Why does that matter? And thinking about that, we've got some experiments just to give you a visual look at it. Initially, we'll do the slaking test. So I've got two samples here. One is a tilled sample, one is a no-till sample. It's over 10 years of no-till. This is a typical till in the fall, till in the spring system. So whether it's a garden that you're rototilling it, or whether it's a farm field that you're disking it, chiseling it, working it up, doesn't really matter. You can see significant difference in the organic matter content. These are both the same soil type, clarion soil. So as that water is soaking into those clods, it's expanding just like this sponge is expanding. So that water is moving into the clod, it's expanding the clod. So you're seeing a lot of the no-till pop apart because it is taken out of the soil this spring. It's coming out after the winter. It's very fragile. But if you look at it, they're big clumps coming across out of there. And that one is really going at it. When you look at the tilled sample, it's a lot finer particles, and it's breaking apart slower. The reason it's breaking apart slower is it's taking that water a lot longer to get into that dried clod. But as it's breaking apart, it's very, very fine particles. And again, that water is soaking up, expanding that clod. So it takes that time to get into the clod. In a minute, 5 minutes or so, you'll start noticing a distinct difference in the water clarity between the two of those. The larger clods from the no-till sample will settle out. The tilled sample will remain a very milky or dirty look, typically what we see in a lot of our river systems. So you might think, why does that really matter? I mean, it's a clod breaking up. Doesn't really matter. What impact does that have on me? So in this, it's just a simple infiltration test. So I've got cups in the top. We'll just pour some water in it. I guess they should say the bottom of that does have holes in it, so if it does come out and come through, it will come through the sample. So I'll go ahead and get these in and then get out of the way. This is the no-till sample. The clods are much more stable. Whereas the tilled sample, it has gone in to that surface, but then it's slowing down. As that water hits that soil surface, that slaking effect is happening at a smaller and smaller scale, plugging those surface holes. And as it's plugging those surface holes, it's reducing the rate at which that water is going to go through. Whereas the tilled or no-tilled sample allows that water to go through. Now, to be fair, I gave it about a 15-inch rain in about 30 seconds. So this is an extreme example. But you can see, even with that extreme level of water, extreme level of moisture on top of that, similar situation, how quickly that water is able to move down through that profile within the no-tilled sample. So when we're growing plants, what do we need? We want plant health, don't we? We want good root growth. We want the stability of that soil. Within that, we've got to have moisture management. If we don't manage our moisture, we're either going to be too wet or too dry. And how do we manage that? And on a smaller and smaller scale, it becomes a little bit tougher to manage that moisture effectively. One of the things that I've learned from my wife, she's an avid gardener, is that on tomatoes, it is critical to have consistent, even moisture or watering. If you go out there, oh, they're dry, water them up, and then let them dry back out, and then you go water them back up, you'll start seeing a significant calcium deficiency. The root system just cannot sustain that wet, dry period. So consistent moisture, consistent soil capacity is good. So how can we increase that, enhance that? Looking at the biology, making sure that the water moves through that system. So one of the principles we talked about was a living root. Feeding the biology, keeping it growing and living. One of the things I've always said, I'm a visual kind of person. If you take all of the food or take all of the surface away, the residue, and you do a tillage operation, it's kind of like having 2-a-days of football. And you have those teenage boys or the bacteria in the soil. When they come home, if there's food in the refrigerator, they're going to eat it. And you can't keep your cupboards full of food because they're hungry, they've got plenty of oxygen, they've got expended their energy, they're going to be eating everything they can get. And bacteria thrive in that environment. So you've tilled that soil, you've added oxygen, you've added the organic matter into that soil, the bacteria population explodes to start taking advantage of all those resources. When they start running out of plant residues, they start digesting the soil glues, the compounds that hold all of the soil particles together, and it starts weakening those bonds. Then they can't withstand that water infiltration. And as those bonds start breaking, that's when you start losing your air percentage in your soil. Your soil starts compressing, getting more compact. Your roots have a lot harder time to grow. You have a lot harder time digging in it, working in it, planting in it. Solution in most cases is till it up, fluff it up again. Research has shown that continually fluffs it up, but then the next time it compacts it more. The next dry cycle compacts it more. So getting from a tilled system into a no-till system is very difficult. It takes time, it takes management, and it takes resilience and concentration, or not concentration, but commitment to it. And it gets really tough in that second, third, fourth year before you kind of get over the hump, and then you start seeing that soil tilth come back in once the biology starts functioning. Understanding that a lot of gardening, a lot of aspects of handwork, hand labor, putting plants in, tillage sometimes is an option. So if we're doing tillage, we're damaging the system, we're damaging the biology of the soil. So now how can we mitigate that? So it's the system. So if we're tearing down the system in one part, can we build it up in another? So we've got a rainfall simulator here. We've got 5 trays on here. This one here is a prairie sample. As you can see, it's just waking up, early spring. This is a grazed pasture. Hasn't been grazed, so the surface is fairly loose, but you can see a lot of soil is exposed to that rainfall energy. Trivia fact: how fast, miles per hour, is a raindrop going on a typical average speed when it hits the soil or hits a roof coming out of a cloud?
45 miles an hour.
About twice, double what it is. It's about 20, on average, 20 mile an hour. So you think about that, and if you're hit by a car at 20 mile an hour, it's going to hurt, isn't it? But you think on that raindrop coming down, hitting that soil surface at 20 mile an hour causes that physical damage. So how can we protect that physical surface? That's why I made a point of how much soil is open in this pasture sample. Got two tilled samples. They're just a typical tillage, fall and spring tillage. Both those are out of a crop field, but again, the principles hold whether you're in crop or in garden. This one is a diversified rotation. It's easiest, we don't have a lot of good examples of no-till gardens, so I did pull that out of a crop field. It's a corn bean, and they're putting rye cereal grain into that rotation. It's been no-tilled for at least 10 years. They are transitioning over to doing some strip till, where they're doing tillage in small strips, shallow, to get the plant in there. One of these tilled samples, I'm going to mulch it heavy. One of the things that as a gardener you need to be very careful with is if you know the source of your hay, great. If you don't know the source of your hay, and I am saying hay instead of oats or straw, for one main reason is no combine is 100%. You buy straw, you're going to plant oats. Or if you buy wheat straw, you're going to plant wheat in your garden. So we like to use hay. Problem with hay is grass hay, the potential for graze-on, broadleaf weed killer to be sprayed on it. If you get ditch hay, a lot of counties, most of the counties, use graze-on to control the broadleaves in the ditch. So one thing my wife and I always try to do is get hay that has a percentage of clover or alfalfa in it. 'Cause if it's got clover or alfalfa in it, you know it hadn't had graze-on. One thing with graze-on, if horses, this is an actual example, horses grazing on a pasture, they collected the manure, they composted it, they bagged it, they sold it at a big box store, I don't know which one it was, this is quite a few years ago, and gardener bought it, put it on their garden, killed their garden. Graze-on is extremely resilient as it goes through that system, whether it be hay or the manure. So know where your compost comes from, make sure it doesn't have the graze-on, make sure your hay comes from not having it. So I'm just going to mulch that heavy. Because as I was saying, we've done a tillage operation, whether that be for planting ease, whether that be to break up that hard pan that we found underneath, or it's just what we have to do or feel like we need to do. So keeping it covered is going to protect that soil surface. One, from raindrop impact, and two, it moderates that temperature so it doesn't get extreme fluctuations from night to day. And on a day like this, I should have brought the temperature probe, but generally on a day like today, soil will be up around 90 degrees. if June time frame when that crop is growing but hadn't canopied, I've seen it up in that 120, 130 degrees on the soil surface. That's starting to kill the biology. It cannot survive at those temperatures. So I'll kick this on and we can talk a little bit more. So this simulation, is it perfect? No. It's the best we can do to show multiple treatments side by side in what it would look like in a rain. So I measured the slope on these trays. It's about 10% slope. So it's not an excessive slope. It's a nice gentle rolling. We've got some slope out there, but it's not super steep. It's nice, good farm ground. Would be a nice area that you're going to get your drainage off of that. Draining at about 4 to 6 inches per hour. So initially you think, how many times do we get a 4 to 6 inch an hour rain in Iowa? Probably not that often that we get a consistent 4 to 6 inch an hour rain. But have you ever listened to when it's raining and you hear that rain come in and just beat on the roof, and then it'll ease back off? And then it'll come in and the intensity will come back up, and then it'll kind of ease back off. What are those intensities within those rainstorms? So it's not necessarily the overall, but really looking at the duration of that rain. And again, putting it into a simulator standpoint, putting in that very high rainfall event exaggerates or exacerbates what we see on the landscape. So if we saw that in a situation in the field, nice, gentle 24-hour rain, we get an inch in 24, 36 hours, we're not going to see that excessive runoff. It's going to have time to soak back down in. So we're running at about a 3/4 inch rain right now. You can see the impact of that raindrop on that bare soil surface has slicked that surface off. So we've got the slaking, the breaking up of the particles, plugging those holes, as well as that physical impact damaging that surface, making it impervious for that rain, or slowing the amount of rain that's soaking into that surface extensively. The runoff between the trays, you can see pretty obvious which one is running off the worst, how much erosion we're having on that. The other ones are running off, but not near as excessively. We're just shy of an inch of rain. I'll shut this off. So in the prairie, we're getting a little bit of runoff. What runoff we're getting isn't really that dirty as compared to the bare-tilled soil. So bare-tilled soil, how much of that rain did we lose? So moisture management is key. So just to show you there's no different or no magic here. The tray does have holes in the bottom of it. But the bottom of that tray is dry. We soaked in right at about an inch. This is a 2-inch depth. How deep is your soils? How deep are our roots? How deep do we want moisture? So that's what, about less than 10 minutes, right at 10 minutes, and just shy of an inch of rain. 10% slope, not a huge slope. Lost most of the rain. What's causing flooding in Iowa? Is it the tile or is it the infiltration? We're losing our infiltration. We're losing the capacity of the soil to take that rainwater in. So what happens on the same sample, but yet putting a cover over top of it? So we're still having some infiltration issues, not getting it completely, but we had it coming through. Physical protection of that soil surface mitigates some of the tillage that we're doing. Can we do that on a 1,000-acre farm? No. Can we do it on a 1,000-square-foot garden? Absolutely. The runoff from that residue-covered tilled sample versus the not residue-covered. Significant difference in quantity, significant difference in color. The soil, nature has a way of using the deep roots to bring nutrients and moisture to the surface. So all year long, that plant is pumping the nutrients and moisture up from deep, putting it on the surface. When we lose our surface, we're losing the best part of our soil. We're losing that nutrient-rich best part, the cream of the soil, we're losing it. No-till. Quite clear, very similar in quantity to the prairie of what ran off. So is there a way that we can farm, produce agriculture, produce our commodities, and still benefit the soil, still have that benefit without seeding it down to prairie? Yes, we can. It just takes effort. The till or the pasture, again, that physical damage to that soil surface, and then the water running off the soil surface. So another quick fact. What's the first step of erosion? Detachment. Once a particle is detached from the mass, now it can move. Second part of erosion, a force to move it. So that concrete over there is very, very stuck together, so you don't have detachment. You've got the force of the water running over it, but you don't have detachment. In the soil, once you have detachment and movement, whether it's wind or water, away it goes. So the rest of the story, so it had more than this, but the prairie sample infiltration. This is the grassland sample that has grazing on it. Again, hasn't been grazed since last year. Very loose soil surface from the winter freeze and thaw, but yet that physical action of the rainwater hitting it, causing less infiltration. So the tilled sample probably went around the outside edge of the tray a little bit. There's the tilled sample that has the mulch on it. A little bit came through both of them. The tilled sample, obviously it wasn't flowing through that sample. It was finding a pathway probably between the tray and that to cause it that much soil that came with it. This is more where the prairie sample would have been as far as the amount of moisture coming through that prairie. Interesting deal I did with a group of kids on the simulator. We had nitrate strips, and we tested the amount of nitrate in what went off the surface and we tested how much nitrate went through the prairie. What went through the prairie was 2 parts per million, the water. What went off the surface was 10 parts per million. That just 2 inches of profile made a significant difference in the ability of that soil to capture that nutrient and keep it from being lost. So when we're gardening, when we're out there, coming back to what is soil health? It is soil quality. It is quality of soil for us to grow plants, to capture sunlight energy, to capture that nutrient base in that soil. So keeping the soil covered moderates the temperature, protects it from that physical impact. Getting a living root in that system as long as we can is going to give the exudates to the soil, or the organisms. It's going to feed the organisms. They won't be breaking down the soil glues. They'll actually be making the soil glues. Less tillage will impact the biological makeup. It will increase the amount of arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi. Can't believe I've got to this point in this talk and haven't even talked about AMF, arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi. That's the fun one. That one's the absolute fantasia of the soil. It will communicate with plants. It communicates between plants. So it has been shown on the mycorrhizal fungi system that it will resource nitrogen from a legume if it's growing in the same field, take it over, barter with a corn plant for that exudate to capture and mine phosphorus out of the soil and trade that to that legume. So it is a cycle so that it survives. It's bartering with the plants at all times. Fantastic organism. Tillage damages it. It is a filament growing through the soil, so our tillage breaks that filament down. They're very microscopic. In thinking of a clod of soil, that much soil has more biology in that clod than our people. More individual organisms are in that clod than our people on Earth. What are we, 7 billion people on Earth? They say a teaspoon. I go a little bit more than a teaspoon because this one's really neat because it's got the earthworm hole right through it. Very stabilized part of the biology in putting those vertical holes up and down through the soil. One of the things that I think of in the earthworms, so I was in a co-op way back in the 90s when the Rawson zone till was coming out. One of the things they preached was if you've got a compaction layer, our freeze-thaw cycle in the winter, it doesn't have any ability to move side to side. So it expands. You have some flake off the top, you have some flake off the bottom of that compaction layer, but you're not getting as good a breakup as you really need. So they were promoting going through with a deep ripper to give those vertical channels through that compaction layer so that when we go into that winter thaw, it expands both horizontally as well as vertically. The earthworm is nature's tiller. It gives those holes so that we have that vertical and horizontal freeze-thaw action. Wonderful system in Iowa that we can capture that freeze-thaw. Other parts of the country aren't so lucky to have as extensive of a freeze-thaw. So we've got the soil covered, we've got a living root in there, we're trying to minimize the tillage. The last real big principle, especially if we're looking at it in a small scale, is diversity. And by the way, if you're talking to a group of third graders, don't ask this question. Would you like to eat Cheerios 3 times a day, every day, 7 days a week, all year long.
Yes.
Third graders will say yes. So it kind of backfires. But it would get boring. It wouldn't give us the nutritional value we need, and we would start suffering that if we don't have good nutrition. The biology in the soil is exactly the same way. We need to have diversity of root, diversity of the size of root, the makeup of the root. Grass has a very fibrous root. Having a brassica out there has a little bit more of a taproot like system. Putting carrots in there gives a good deep root. Radishes give a good deep taproot. Diversifying that enhances that biology, enhances the ability of the soil to withstand environmental impacts, as well as provide the nutrition that we need for our plants. I had a thought and I lost it. So, but anyway, that thinking of how we can make money by growing crops and protecting our factory. And the factory is our soil. The cover crops that Dr. Nair was talking about is one way in a garden system that you can get that added diversity. It's a challenge to get it in there timely. You have to plan ahead, so when you're thinking that you're just coming into full production of your tomatoes, that's kind of when you start needing to think of throwing your cover crop out there so that it can start getting established underneath those tomatoes, so that when they start to die off or senesce, your cover crop's already growing. If you wait until your tomatoes are already almost done, now you've lost that window that you could have had that cover crop growing. If you're putting it out there with pesticide, thinking about what's your next crop going to be. If you're going to be going out there with pumpkins and squash that you're not going to be planting until middle of June, putting a rye or an overwintering cover crop works really well, because then you can let it grow up, head out, and start to what they call anthesis. So once it starts pollinating, you'll see little yellow anthers coming out of the head. When it gets to that stage, all of it gets to that stage, you can crimp it. So you can walk it down. I've seen a 2x4 with a rope where you can just walk down, smash it down, and it won't grow. It won't come back. If you do it before it hits that anthesis, it'll come back gangbusters. Very tenacious plant. But we're looking about 1st to the 10th of June in Iowa when we're going to hit that. Some varieties like Airstuck might be a little bit sooner than that. Some may be a little bit later than that. But then you can go in there and move that residue back, plant your pumpkins, your squash, watermelon. Good time frame yet, good weed control. If you're going to be planting early, your lettuce, carrots, broccoli and that, think about putting either a oats cover crop out in the fall so that it's dead before you go out there and plant. Or if you've got a diverse, putting the lettuce and radishes in that early in the fall and taking it late into the fall, you may not need that cover crop until spring. So then spring you might consider putting something out there like a legume, let it grow long enough to get that nitrogen, but now you're going to have to terminate it. In a legume, more than likely you're going to be looking at a pesticide or herbicide to be able to control that legume coming into your crop. So it just depends on your management on how to get that incorporated into your system. So with that, any thoughts or questions? You can see where the slaking, the tilled sample definitely has that dirty look to it. The no-till, very clear.
It saved you.
It did.
Yeah.
Finally did. Yep. But again, that is an extreme hard time to get those samples because we're coming out of winter. Your glues, your biology, everything has basically taken a break over the winter, and that freeze-thaw cycle has broken a lot of those glues and bonds to the larger colloids of that soil.